Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Direct Restorative Prep Place Profit. My name is David Rice. I'll give you a little bit of my background, but we are going to boogie this evening because we have got a lot of ground to cover. So, although I live in St. Petersburg, Florida, my practice is in East Amherst, New York. Short story, that means Buffalo to those of you who've not been to the tundra that is our winter. That's my team. They're awesome. I think you can tell they like each other a lot, and I'd like to thank them every time I do something like this with all of you, because all of the dentistry that you're going to see and all of the things that happen that I've learned over the years, we've learned together, and certainly everybody on that team has taught me a lot. When I'm not practicing, I wear a couple hats. So I am the chief editor over at Dentistry IQ. That's a great place to go if you want short video tips, tricks, great little articles to read on what helps you succeed in your dental practice. It's a nice forum to go to, both for us as dentists, for hygienists, assistants, and admins. There's something there for everybody. And last and certainly not least, like my greatest passion in life is this little community we formed called Ignite DDS. It started off with a small group of people in said Buffalo, New York. And today we're over 43,000 members of dentists of different ages and dental students and dental team members. And it has been a lot of fun. Our chief mission is really to help dentists and team members become better leaders, better entrepreneurs, better clinicians through community and through continuing education. So before we jump in tonight, I'm going to show you a slide. It's my favorite slide. If you've seen me speak before, you have seen this slide, but I love it for a couple of reasons. On your right is my better 9/10. That's Anastasia. She kind of keeps me motivated, gives me creative spirit, and is the ultimate support person, both personally and professionally for me. She's awesome. You could just tell by the look on her face that she screams like happiness and joy, and it's contagious, and all these great things that we're going to talk about tonight to be happy and successful in your practice life. I'm going to tell you all starts at home, because it's tough to fake it at work every day when you're not happy. So build a life of people, build a place where you like to live, and get happy at home. On the left-hand side is a great friend of ours. Her name's Karen Jacobson. You know her. You just know her as Siri. So Karen is the female Aussie voice of Siri. She's also the female Australian voice of every GPS system in the world. So you know her, but I like her for what you and I do in dentistry, because we have patients and they walk in the door every day and they're in a spot and they need us to bring them to another spot. And there's lots of ways to get there. Now, some of the ways we can get there are direct. Some of the ways we can get there take the long road. Some are scenic. We can, drive a car, we can walk, we can take a bicycle, we can take an airplane, depending on how far we want to go. But what's really, really critical for us and our topic tonight is to understand that there are definitive right ways to get from where we're starting to where we need to be. And then there's some other ways that don't have science behind them and maybe make us feel good, but aren't necessarily scientifically good. So we're going to talk objective fact here this evening. And I would encourage all of you, take some good notes as you go along. We're going to have a little Q&A before we wrap up this evening. But my goal tonight is to act like Karen and, help us walk from a place in direct restorative from where you and I all are to where we want to go posteriorly, anteriorly, with a couple different scenarios. So we're going to start here because, in my humble opinion, this is super important. And sometimes you and I forget how complex dentistry really is. And we undervalue all the things that we do because we're used to doing it all day, every day. But I want you all to remember that, adhesive dentistry is tough. It's tough. And we could spend literally 3-4 hours just on this one topic. I'm going to show you at the end how to get more of all of this stuff if you'd like to get more of it, if you want to dive deeper into any one of these topics. But, we're going to hit the keys tonight. Like I said, there are plenty. I want to look at the most important ones, and I want to look at them really from two perspectives. So first perspective, at the end of the day, if you are anything like me, you guys want a reliable bond that lasts. You probably also want zero post-op sensitivity. And hopefully there aren't 27 steps to make those two things happen, right? That's perspective one. Second perspective is science. We need solid science to back it all up. So we're going to geek out a little bit here because adhesives at their core, they all do three things. They etch, they prime, and they bond. And how they do all that from system to system is different. And the science kind of leads us to understand that some do it better than others, depending on how you and I like to make this happen, because there's some different ways. So we're going to look at this on a couple different levels as well, and we're going to dive a little deeper. Level one, in today's adhesive world, we often talk about, you and I having three options, right? We talk about we can self-etch on top. We talk about we can selectively etch, where we're only etching the enamel and we're not putting an extra etchant on the dentin surface. And we can also decide to total etch. And like I said, we only have an hour tonight, so we're going to hit the most salient points. But you and I having a strategy for which technique we're going to use and why it matters, right? It matters. So let's dig a little deeper, and I want you to stick with me on this, because we're going to divide adhesives into two big buckets. Bucket number one is etch and rinse. So we are choosing to put a separate phosphoric etchant on the tooth, and we can do this in a couple of ways, right? There are systems when we etch and rinse where we acid etch, we rinse it off, we dry it, then we add a primer, and then on top of that, we add a bonding resin. So it's 3 steps. There are also systems within etch and rinse where it's 2 steps, right? We have that same acid etch, we rinse it, we dry it, but the primer and the bonding resin are in one container. Then we've got self-etch, and we've got choices in self-etch as well, right? We've got a 2-step system. So we've got an acidic primer plus a second step, which is the bonding resin, or we've got an all-in-one bottle. We've got an acidic primer and a bonding resin, and it's in the same container. So you and I have options. Then, enter the most popular adhesives today. Enter universal bonding agents, meaning that you and I can choose to etch and rinse, or we can choose to self-etch. And based on the system, we might have 3 steps, 2 steps, 1 steps, but that's why we call them universal, because we can use them everywhere. And I'm going to caveat that with kind of, because I want you to remember what our ideal adhesive goals are, right? We all think we want a long-lasting bond. That's something we'd like, right? It would be great to have no post-op sensitivity. And third, it would be really nice, again, right? We don't want to have any more steps to accomplish all that than we absolutely have to have. So check this out with me. And there's a lot of information on here. I'm sort of intentionally breaking a slide rule with this, because there's a lot to know, but we're only going to focus on a few things. So first, left-hand side of the screen in the blue is a short list of the top universal bonding agents in dentistry. Again, we could totally nerd out on all these things for a few hours, and I'm going to show you how we can do that before we finish, but I want you to focus on left-hand side in the blue. We've got the big players out there in dentistry in the universal bonding agent world. They all have 2 major components. So in the pink, you'll see they have functional monomers, And in the white, you'll see that they have solvents, right? They have carriers. It's what keeps the bonding agent from getting all gummy inside of the container that it's in. So those two components matter. And in the pink, what you're going to see are functional monomers. Now, what I want you to pay attention to as you look down that list is you're going to see one called MDP. And you're going to see that in Adhes Universal by Avatar Vivadent. You'll see it in Scotch Bond Universal. You'll see it in Prime and Bond, and you're going to see it in Clearfill. And it's an important component when it comes to functional monomers. It's a winner because it's time tested. It's been around for a long time in the adhesive space. And what it helps us to do, why it's been around for so long, is it helps us not only get a great bond, day one when we're placing a restoration, but it helps us maintain that bond over a long period of time. Because if you've ever done research on this topic, what you'll know is, not all adhesives, not all composite systems allow us to maintain a bond for extended periods of time. That's one of the reasons adhesive dentistry breaks down. So we want a bonding agent that's been time tested. And what I really, really love about MDP is it's been around a long time. So you're also going to see that some of our systems, for example, Adhes Universal, has a second functional monomer, MCAP, right? So a lot of these systems, we're trying to maximize our adhesive today, and we're trying to maximize our adhesive over long term so we can hit that it lasts a long time, so we can hit zero post-op sensitivity, and so we can hit, hey, there doesn't have to be a lot of steps. That's the reason, the function behind functional monomers. And on the solvent side, as I mentioned, that's the carrier that we need to keep these guys in check. Now, what I want you to pay attention to is the other part that's in pink, the asterisk. So the first one you're going to see is that those functional monomers help us bond to the calcium and the hydroxyapatite crystal, which is why you and I don't have to totally etch. It's why we don't have to put a second etchant on the dentin, because these bonding agents today that have the right functional monomers, they do all the work on the dentin for us. The double asterisk, really, really important, because some of you, not so much in this direct restorative world, placing a class 1, 2, 4, or 5 restoration as examples, but for example, placing a dual cure material, a core buildup, what you have to be really careful of is that your adhesive, your bonding agent, has the right functional monomers to keep the pH where we want the pH, because the more acidic our adhesive is, the more acidic our bonding agent is, the more difficulty we have using that bonding agent with a dual cure material. So above all other things that we talk about tonight, I want you to make sure that you read the IFU, the instructions for use with whatever adhesive you're using. If you're having zero trouble with your adhesive, awesome, keep using it. If you're having trouble with your adhesive, it's a good reason to pay attention to why some of these adhesives perform better than other, and pH being an important part of that story tonight. So I just mentioned IFU, I just mentioned instructions for use. I want to add to that material forgiveness. And I love this image because I want you to think about dentin, which is a really delicate part of the tooth structure and a really important part of that adhesive interface, as a forest, right? I want you to think of the collagen trees that are in dentin. So imagine for a second that dentin is this picture, and it's a forest, right? And imagine this forest, instead of looking through it like we can see it now, imagine it was so dense that there was no sunlight in between those trees. So here's the function in adhesive dentistry, right? Whether we're using a 3-step system, a 2-step system, let's talk about universal bonding agents because that's what most of us are using. But I want you to imagine component 1's the etch. And the etchant takes that super dense forest where there's no sunlight in between those trees to get down to the floor of that forest. And the etchant creates the forest that you see. It clears the way for some sun to get in between the trees. So we don't want too much sun between those trees, right? Too much sun would damage the floor of our forest. It's kind of like over etching. So you and I don't want to put etchant on there for too long a period of time. We don't want to damage the collagen trees at the dentin if you're etching your dentin. Same thing with over drying, right? Think about what happens. We've all learned about like don't desiccate a tooth. So over etching, over drying would be a similar problem, right? If those trees got over dried and they died, what would they do? They'd collapse, right? They would fall to the floor and they would block the floor of the forest and they would block that sun from getting to it. Make sense? Okay. So then that's component one, right? We talked about 3 basic components. The second component we talked about was the primer. So let's say we did a really good job. We etched. We've got that daylight, our collagen trees, our forest looks just like the one on the screen. So we've got some daylight in there. And imagine at the top of this image where the sky is, it's the occlusal, the occlusal surface of the tooth. So it's the top. And then imagine between those trees are our dentinal tubules. And we're trying to make sure that we get component number 3, the bond, all the way down to the ground. That's where the magic happens, right? We've got to get our bond down to that interface and deep into those dentinal tubules so we can actually stick to tooth structure. That's the goal. So now I want you to imagine that we just did an okay job on the etch and the prime. Like either like we kind of cleared the trees out, or maybe we did over etch. Maybe the prime did a pretty good job, but not an okay job. And we're trying to figure out how to stand those trees back up because we dried it out too much or we etched too much, so we need to re-wet them. And then imagine the other side of that we left it too wet, right? There's a major thunderstorm and things are too wet. There's puddles all over the floor of the forest. Both of those scenarios are bad, right? Too wet, too dry, desiccated, too much moisture. I mean, think about that for a second. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we had an adhesive that helped us? I mean, after all, what is too wet and what is too dry? So for me, I'm always trying to work with products and technology that is advanced, something that helps. Now, I want to be textbook whenever I can be textbook, but sometimes, let's be honest, maybe it's a little too wet, maybe it's a little too dry. So an intelligent adhesive, a great universal adhesive, helps us compensate. It's why I use Adhes Universal. It's not that the others are bad. It's simply that Adhes, it checks all my 3 boxes. I get a long-term stable bond. I get no post-op sensitivity. I get to minimize my 3 steps. So look at this chart with me for a second. Look at the 3 columns. So column 1, whether you look at Adhes, peak, all bond, future bond, prime bond, or not prime, but column 1 means we left it wet. And look at the bond strength in megapascals of Adhes compared to the other adhesives. Again, the other ones aren't bad, but look who performs well. Then look at column 2, and that's dry, in theory, where we're supposed to be. And then look at column 3 and say, desiccated. Man, we just over dried it. What I appreciate most about Adhes Universal with this image right here is the fact that it helps you and I compensate. Because whether I've left things a little too wet, I've dried them, or I've accidentally desiccated them, I still get high bond strengths when I compare it to other adhesives on the market. That's what I'm looking for, so I can check those 3 boxes on what makes an ideal adhesive for me, what makes my life easy, what makes my patients happy, what keeps my phone from ringing at night after we've worked on patients all day long. So really quickly, just 2 points here on dispensing systems, because you and I can get adhesive lots of different ways, right? We can get it in a pen. Adhes Universal comes in a Viva pen. It's pretty slick if you've never seen it. We can get single use, we can get multi-use bottles. But 2 quick points. First, every time you and I uncap our adhesive, some of that solvent evaporates. Remember, there's two sides to this. There's functional monomers, there's solvents. But every time I uncap that multi-use bottle, solvent evaporates. That means there's changes in our chemistry, meaning our adhesive, our bonding agent is ideal on day one. First time we open that bottle, it's ideal. But a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, a month later, it no longer reflects the ideal data any manufacturer puts out, AKA the advent of single-use systems and why Ivoclar developed the Viva Pen. So you and I get fresh adhesive every single time we unit. Second, I don't know if you've ever run the numbers on this. If you haven't, you should. The most expensive dental product you buy, and I mean if anything you buy, is your adhesive. So waste is a big problem. And I'm going to caveat that for a second. Waste is a big problem, but caveat is this: not using enough adhesive to save yourself money is a bigger problem, right? When it comes to our 3 goals. Because if you don't apply enough adhesive properly, you're going to compromise the longevity of your bond. You will get post-op sensitivity. And I want you guys to really pay attention because we want to use the right amount. We don't want to waste, but we want fresh adhesive every single time. So let's look at our workhorse today. The posterior composite class 2. For most of us and most of our practices, this is over 80% of what we do, guys. So class 2 posterior composites. And what that means to me, my take home is I had better be pretty efficient in how I deliver my aesthetics. This is the caliber of direct composite dentistry today. And I'm going to show you this case we'll walk through a little bit, but this is 2 layers of composite. This is not a big deal. This is efficient aesthetics, and there's a few different ways to get it. And the cool part about dentistry, like everything else, is you can choose your route. So long as you're using the right adhesive, the right composite, and the right curing light, this becomes really, really predictable to do. So let's start at the beginning. Prep design. I'm a big, big fan of conserving tooth structure. I am not, however, a fan of restorations that fail prematurely, because at that point, I feel like I've really not been conservative. If I have to retreat a tooth in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, because I was too conservative in my preparation design, then I truly haven't been that conservative, right? I got to go back in there. My goal is to restore teeth so they look like the slide you just saw. And in a decade, look at those restorations and say, boy, those are looking good. And of course, I'm not talking about the patient that no matter how great of a job you and I do, they just don't know that the bristle under the toothbrush goes in to take care of them. We're talking about most of your patients who are doing a reasonable job taking care of things at home, who've got like reasonable genetics in their favor. So prep design, I like it as minimal as old restorations allow, as minimal as decay allows. And this is my last one based on conserving tooth, but not too much tooth, as minimal as my instruments allow. Because here's what happens when you and I try to get too conservative with our prep design. These preps got a little too conservative. Look at the gaps. Would those restorations last? Did you achieve longevity? Would there be post-op sensitivity? Would you, or worse, would another dentist have to redo this dentistry in short order? I mean, just check out all those errors and all those gaps. So if you cannot get an instrument in to get the depth of your proximal box perfectly sealed, if you can't matrix it properly, if you can't access it properly, then I'm going to tell you that's where, even though I love minimal preparation, that's where I expand my preparation so I have ideal access and I don't leave gaps. So I get this question all the time. I'm just going to answer it. Burrs. There's plenty of great burr companies out there. There's not one that's better than the other in a lot of different areas. So pick your poison, whomever you like to work with. But there's some basic shapes that work really well with composites. So a 330 or a 245, everyone makes them. I love those shapes. Why? Well, they have rounded corners, and composites like rounded corners. So They're also amazing for other restorative arenas, so I don't have to stock too many things. But for me, I'm trying to streamline my process, make life easier for my assistant. When I do that with Stephanie and Christy, they're super happy. And when they're happy, I'm happy. But I also want a burr that's going to do the job for me, and I don't have to try too hard. Burr side. Instrument side. I am a giant fan of Hugh Freedy's composite instruments. I didn't bother to show you an image of them here. I'm pretty certain you're all using Hugh Freedy instrumentation already, but they have a wide spectrum of composite instruments and all the shapes that you and I want. And again, the beauty of dentistry is you and I can choose the ones that work best in our hands. I did, however, want to show you this instrument. This is the Optrasculpt. You can ask your local Ivoclar rep, your local Patterson rep, or whomever you purchase through. It's a winner. There's an anterior pad that you see there. It's kind of a flat pad. There's a posterior that you see. It almost looks like a little ball burnisher, but that's a plugger. And there are other attachments that you and I can shape anatomy. I really, really wish that I got paid somehow, like how many dentists I've introduced this to use it. I don't. I have no skin in this game. The only thing I can tell you is once you guys try it, you'll never go back. It's a tremendous instrument. So step one is use the right burrs. Step two is have the right instruments that fit your burrs. Then there's this question, comes up all the time. What makes us want to dip an instrument or wet an instrument? Well, some composites are really sticky, right? If you're using a composite that's really sticky, you can help yourself out by switching gears and use some of the composites that we're going to talk about this evening. Handling is a really important quality to your composite, both anteriorly and posteriorly. Some are much better than others, but that said, the right instruments like Optrasculpt really help, and some instruments are better than others. So here's what I would encourage you not to do. I would encourage you not to dip whatever instrument you're using into your adhesive. Think about what you're doing. You're introducing a liquid form in between your composite, which is super strong and engineered to withstand occlusal forces. And also when you add layer to layer, you're introducing potential gaps. So I would highly recommend you not dipping your instrument in adhesive. Yes, there are wetting agents you can use. What I'd really, really recommend to all of you is that you use the right burrs, the right instruments, and the right composite, and you will no longer need to dip or wet an instrument. The technology is there, and everything will happen for you. So process, we prepped our tooth. How do we sequence for success? How do we get efficient aesthetics? So we can prep, we can place, we can profit. Because you all know, I'm preaching to the choir, that in today's world, those of you who are in a fee-for-service practice, awesome, that's fantastic. But there's a lot of people here who I'm sure participate in a lot of PPOs. You don't have time to monkey around. You've got to do this efficiently without compromising your quality of care. So sequence for success, sequence for speed, and when I change gears. Quadrant dentistry. 99 out of 100 times, I'm restoring that middle tooth. Why? So I can come back and restore the anterior and the posterior tooth together, because I have personally found that with all sectional matrix systems, bar one, I'll show you that one next, it makes more sense to restore these teeth in a sequence rather than all at one time. If you take a typical sectional matrix system or a Toffelmeyer system and try to restore these three teeth all at one time, you're either going to have no contact, light contact, or point contact. If we want really ideal contours that gives us convexity and build these teeth like Mother Nature, I would highly recommend with this system, sectional or Toffelmeyer, you build that middle tooth first, you come back and build the teeth anterior and posterior. And if you want to switch gears, there's one system where you can restore teeth back to back to back, and that's BioClear. So BioClear, if you've not used it, is a thicker mylar material. The ring system you'll see on there, you'll notice the difference between this ring system and the last ring system. And the next slide will show you the single again, in case you missed it. But there's double rings. So both on that purple and on that yellow, those two rings are really, really splaying those teeth. That's how we can restore these teeth back to back to back. And when we pull out that double ring, we still have a really nice proximal contact. But look at this compared to this Garrison ring, and whether it's Palident, Triodent, all the dents, the single ring system with a sectional matrix system, they only have that one ring. I would highly recommend doing this one at a time. Or like I said, you're going to get contacts like you see. Those are light, bordering on open, and that is a recipe for your patient calling you up and telling you things are getting stuck between their teeth. So we've matrixed. Let's pretend you have either total etched, selectively etched, or self-etched, dealer's choice. If it's me, FYI, in today's world, I am selective etching. I'm etching my enamel, and I'm not etching my dentin. There's a lot of great data to support that works well. Our next step after we apply our adhesive and cure that is, base with flowable, right? So let's talk about ideal qualities of a flowable composite. These are three. There's more, but these are my biggies. I want a flowable that's radiopaque. I want a flowable that's self-leveling. And I'd like a flowable that has an opacity shift when I cure it, especially when I'm working with a bulk fill composite and I'm putting a larger increment of flowable in, because I'm going to need to, one, mask dentin, and two, I need it to start translucent so I can get depth of cure beyond 2 millimeters. This is a wonderful quality with today's best flowable composites. So let's talk about radio opacity. I love this slide. This slide is showing you omnichroma on one side, on the left-hand side, and it's showing you Ivoclar's tetric power flow on the right. So look at the opacity. That's really, really nice, because there's two reasons you and I take composite out, right? Sometimes it's because it needs it, and sometimes if we don't have the right opacity, then one of our hygienists looks at a film, whether you've done the dentistry or someone else has done it, and I can promise, maybe I'm the only guy here, but I'm guessing I'm not, that some of you have taken out some of your own composites and said, oh my God, that looks great. And you didn't do anything wrong. You're just using a material that isn't radio opaque enough. So it got hung up. So radio opacity, really important. Self-leveling, really, really important. Think about where class 2 composites fail. Gingival seat of the proximal box, right? Remember that slide we looked at and I talked about your ability to get the instruments down there? Well, that's one problem, right? You get an instrument and a too conservative prep and you can't get it down to the seat of that box, we're in trouble. So using a self-leveling flowable means you and I can put it in, and if we don't instrument it, it goes where it needs to go. I love this quality in a flowable composite on posterior teeth, and here's why I don't love it. I don't love it on an anterior tooth. Imagine what would happen if we used a self-leveling flowable on that class 4. What would happen to the flowable? It would run everywhere. It wouldn't stack. It wouldn't stay where we want it. So on my posterior teeth, I love tetric power flow because it is self-leveling. On an anterior teeth, I like tetric evoflow because it stays where I put it. We need those materials to do different things in different situations. And then in addition to the radio opacity, we talked about an opacity shift. So especially in a bulk system, power flow, Ivoclar's bulk flowable, I can place this up to 4 millimeters of depth if I want to. But again, if I want to get appropriate depth of cure while I'm getting that self-leveling, while I'm getting the really nice radio opacity on a radiograph, then I need something that shifts from translucent to more opaque. And the opacity of power flow, once we've cured it, is an awful lot like natural dentin. So it does really great things for us. So this is important. A lot of companies tout, especially in the bulk world, hey, you can go ahead and fill this whole thing up with a flowable composite and it's just fine. This is the homework I want you to do. Don't take my word for it. Do your homework. I want you to look at the research as it looks for flowable composites and why, when I use Ivoclar's system, why Ivoclar even tells us we need to top coat. Why they say, hey, David, don't let that flowable go up and cover your entire occlusal table. Because the data, the science on anyone's flowable might look good on year 1 and year 2. But if you look at the data on year 3, except on a very conservative class 1 restoration where there's no occlusion on the restoration at all, the data shows at year 3, when you and I leave a flowable on a functional area of a tooth, it breaks down fast. Year 3 is that turning point. So I always like to cap my posterior teeth with a paste composite. I don't like to leave a flow on there. So when I'm using Tetric Power Flow as my layer, then I'm going to put Tetric Power Fill on the surface. And that's the restoration I showed you. And I'll show you again on the next slide. That's just 2 layers. Doesn't matter how deep a restoration is, right? Because if I'm deeper than 6-7 millimeters, I'm endo. So if I can do my flow up to 4 millimeters if I want, I can do my Tetric Power Fill up to 4 millimeters. I'm well beyond the depth of any single restorative situation I'm going to be in. Which brings us to layered versus bulk. So we have options in dentistry. What I want to tell you is we have to pay attention to this. We have to pay attention to C factor, to shrinkage stress. And I love layered composites. I will tell you in today's world, I layer composites anteriorly, and on my posterior restorations, I bulk fill them just like this image is here all the time. And I don't break my routine for lots of different reasons, but 1, because it's predictable, 2, because of C factor and shrinkage stress. So here's what shrinkage stress is. You've got a pulpal floor, you've got an occlusal table, you've got a buccal, a lingual, a mesial, and a distal. And when you and I are looking at this, those are all potential bondable surfaces, right? Except the occlusal, we're not going to bond beyond the occlusal table, but we can bond to lots of surfaces. So when the science talks about C factor, what it's trying to tell you is simply divide the number of bonded surfaces by the unbonded surfaces. So think about a class 1 restoration and the bonded surfaces. We're bonding to the pulpal floor, so that's 1. We're bonding to the mesial, we're bonding to the distal, we're bonding to the buccal, we're bonding to the lingual. So there's lots of bonded surfaces. And the only unbonded surface is the occlusal, right? So we have a high C factor, a 5. Now think about if you had an MOD restoration. So now you're bonding to the buccal wall, the lingual wall, the pulpal floor, but then you've got more unbonded surfaces, right? You've got the mesials unbonded. If you have an MOD, you've got the distal is bonded in an MOD, and you've got the occlusal unbonded in MOD. So the C factor is lower on an MOD composite than it is on an occlusal composite or like a class 5 composite. So you and I, the higher the C factor, what we have to realize is the higher the C factor, the more likely we're going to get shrinkage stress. And where people go wrong is, unfortunately, we treat a traditional composite that should only be cured in 2 millimeter increments. We treat it like a bulk fill composite, right? We treat it like power fill and power flow, where we can do 4 millimeters at a click. And that's when we violate the principles and where C factor gets us in trouble. So highest C factor, think about occlusals, think about class 5. Lower C factors, think about class 2s that are MODs, because we have lots of surfaces that are unbondable. So if you like to layer, you've got options, right? Here's some great systems out there. Tetra Prime is a good one. That's Ivoclar Remunite. We talked about Omnichroma. TPH has been around. Filtix Supreme's been around. But what I don't want you to do is add any more than 2 millimeters at a time. or you're going to get in trouble with that whole C factor and shrinkage thing. You're also going to get in trouble with depth of cure, because all of these traditional composites were only meant to be cured maximum 2 millimeters at a time. Now, some of you, this is sort of a big thing that's happening in dentistry all the time. You talk about Omnichroma like their claim to fame, and I'm not saying it's a bad composite, it's a nice composite, but Omnichroma's claim to fame is, we're going to give you one shade and you can restore every tooth. If that's what you want to do, you can do that, and it's not the only system you can do that with, right? So what Omnichroma is, in essence, is Ivoclar, Vivadent's Tetra Prime. It's their T-shade. It's their translucent shade. It's pulling color from the rest of the tooth. That's how we can use one shade. What I want you to remember, though, is if you're using a traditional composite like Tetra Prime, 2 millimeters increment is the biggest increment I want you to place at once. So we come back to this, right? We've restored our middle tooth. We're going to restore the tooth mesial and distal, just like we did. Flowable, boom, boom, at our top layers. And all of a sudden, we're left with this, a restoration, or restorations, a quadrant of, that we did in 2 layers, efficient aesthetics. These restorations that you see here happen to be, like I said, because I'm a huge fan of the power fill system. I like bulk fills on my posterior. This is Tetric Power Flow, cured, Tetric Power Fill, cured, shaped, contour. So I want to debunk a little bit. We're going to click right past this, because obviously if we're using a bulk fill in the posterior segment, we're trying to maximize aesthetics and maximize speed. But I want to debunk a little bit for you some of the myths, because there are some of you here I know who are not using bulk fills, and I'm guessing you're not using them for one of a few reasons. One, aesthetics, right? Somebody told you that you can't use a bulk fill because you can't get maximum aesthetics. This is actually an MOB, that's a one cusp replacement. The mesiobuccal cusp is all composite on this tooth. But the problem is, if you think aesthetics are a problem, it's you've seen a composite system that didn't have all the qualities, right? So when bulk fills came to market, and still today many who don't do it well, the problem aesthetically was they were too translucent, right? Everything grayed out. And the reason they came to market that way, and the reason some of the manufacturers out there still keep them so translucent, is they're worried about depth of cure, right? So they had to make them more translucent in order to do that. Slash in order, some manufacturers like Ivoclar figured out how to overcome it. Shade shift, or their flowable being one big component to that. So that was problem one. Problem two, for some people like Ivoclar who figured it out, was for their competitors is handling, right? So some people said, oh my God, they're too translucent. We really want people to use our bulk fill system. We better add more filler content, right? You and I wanted better looking restorations, just like I showed you. The problem is that some folks didn't do it very well. So handling became an issue, right? When you were placing that composite, I'm guessing this is some of you are here tonight, it started curing before you had a chance to get it all the way to the bottom. So here's what Ivoclar Vivadent did. They got really smart, and they altered the chemistry so that didn't happen. So they maximized translucency at that power flow that we talked about. And there's a lot of technology in the photo initiators and how the cure process actually happens with Ivoclar's composites. So in traditional composites, and again, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds because we still have a lot of ground to cover here, but with traditional composites, like we form these giant chains, and these chains connect, and that's how everything cures. And that's how we get strength and the composite lasts. But Ivoclar figured a system how it steps chains. So instead of like one long giant chain, we get lots of little chains, and it cures in a progression. And that's what Iversarin helps with. That's what Essentio technology helps with. That's what AFCT helps with. So we can maximize our handling with our composite and maximize our result. So depth of cure happens for a lot of reasons, right? If you and I go in 2 millimeter increments, like on the left or in that next page, we're okay, as long as we don't violate the rules. If we use a bulk fill composite and we use one like Power Flow and Power Fill, we also don't have a problem because of chemistry. That's that second image from the right. The next image is really, really important, and that's how we cure it. So I want you guys to think about your composites in systems. Don't, please, 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 like follow somebody's systems. All the data from every single manufacturer is based on working through their process as a system. And one of the integral pieces to a system is our ability to have a great curing light. Depth of cure is the #1 problem we have in restorative dentistry today. So you and I need a curing light, and it doesn't have to be ivy colors, but it does need to have these features, is we have to have a curing light that matches photoinitiators and cures at the right wavelengths. So make sure your light cures your composite, because what you don't want is what I showed in that last image, creme brulee, right? You don't want something that looks cured on the outside, but isn't cured on the inside. That's the beauty of this curing light. It peaks at 2 different waves. So depending on whose composite you're using, again, ideally you're using ivy colors and you're working within a system, but if you're not, you can still use this curing light because it will cure everybody's composite on the market. It's really, really important to understand that. Last thing is super cool. This is lane assist, right? You've all driven a car. You've probably had a conversation with your passenger, and as you look to the right to say hello, your car drifts to the right. So what happens in dentistry problem is if we line up our curing light like we do all the way on that left-hand image, everything works well. But if we move our curing light to the buccal or the lingual, or we're off angle, there's too much data to show that we lose depth of cure. So lane assist in this curing light is amazing because if you and I do go buccal or lingual or too mesial or too distal or off angle, it vibrates just like your steering wheel vibrates in your car, and it automatically adds more time. And if you really mess it up, it's going to just turn it off and you have to start again. It knows enough to cycle through for you. So let's just say we've cured our restoration. We'll get to a good point. I want you to realize at this point, problems that happen in class 2s, form meets function, right? Don't overdo it. White lines happen for a few reasons, but a lot of times white lines aren't so much because of how we fill the tooth, but how we contour and polish a tooth, right? We want to make sure that we don't overheat. We want to make sure we're using a fresh burr because that's what it looks like under an SEM, and that's breakdown, and that's why composites prematurely fail. So 12-bladed carbides work really well. Make sure they're fresh. You can turn the water off if you don't overbulk a lot. Let the burr do the work. Lots of great polishing systems out there on the market. My personal favorite is Optigloss. And if I've got somebody who's got a super high value to their tooth, then I come back with soft flex disc. So anteriors, class 4s, love this image. If you want this image screenshot or reach out to me, I'll give you my email address, but every single anterior tooth looks like that. It's just a matter of how many shades are within it. So there's a recipe. I break down class 4s into simple and complex based on one thing. How many different colors do I need to put in? So if I need a layered composite, but I don't need a lot of different colors, Tetra Prime is amazing. That masks like 80% of the teeth I work on. A challenging class 4 is one where I've got a lot of character. And then I have another choice called Empress Direct. It's amazing. So class 4, I love using a putty matrix. I would highly, highly recommend you do this. You can wax a tooth up, have your lab. You can 3D print a model of your ideal contour. Obviously, we're going to, preparation is nice. Nice wide bevel, super helpful. Polishing your prep, super helpful. Build your tooth from lingual to facial. So that's a lingual shell. It's tough to see in this image, but there is a mylar strip in between 8 and 9 right now for one reason. I want to keep my etchant and my adhesive off number 8 while I'm restoring number 9. And once I keep my etch and adhesive off the tooth, I can build direct, no problem at all. So all I'm doing on this complex class 4 is adding in multiple layers. So I'm building the tooth like Mother Nature built it. I'm adding in mamelons. I'm using a dentin shade so I have the proper opacity. I'm going to put an enamel shade on. I love, love, love using a pencil to help me with my anatomy. And lo and behold, you get a great looking restoration every single time. Last but certainly not least, we're going to hit diastema closures. I want you to pay attention to a couple things on this slide. Rubber dam. It's key to making this easy. You know, a lot of you are not fans of rubber dams, but if you're going to close a diastema with direct composite, rubber dam is your best friend. Isolation, yes, but I want you to pay attention to retraction. This rubber dam is actually pulling that papilla up and out of the way. So it's kind of like putting a wedge in without putting a wedge. You're going to use whatever adhesive technique you like based on what we talked about earlier. In my humble opinion, selective etch in this instance, it's all enamel. So we're going to selectively etch everything, right? If there were dentin, I would keep my etchant off that. Then we're going to build just like we did for the class 4. We're going to build from the lingual towards the facial. You see that there's a mylar strip in that top left image between those two teeth because I did them simultaneously. Using a sable brush is a really, really nice way to kind of finish contour. I'm using some soft flex disc for my incisal edge there. I'm getting my anatomy in after my pencil marks, just like my class 4. And I'm going to come back with my Optigloss and polish. And then if I need high value, I'll add soft flex discs. If I have a medium value or low value teeth, I'm just going to use my Optigloss. I don't even need soft flex discs. But what I want you to pay attention in this image is look at the gap you see, the black triangle while the rubber dam is on. And then look at the image with the rubber dam off. This is immediate post-op. So the only difference, the thing that really saved my day is using a heavy gauge rubber dam. There's a few of them out there. I use IsoDam. You have to specifically look for the heavy gauge so it actually pulls the tissue up out of your way. And what you'll all notice there is I have little floss ligatures to hold everything out of the way. This is really, really easy to do. You can teach your assistant to help you with it. And this is really one of my 2 go-to ways. My second go-to way is this. So just like I showed you on the posterior teeth, where I showed you BioClear has thicker mylar bands, BioClear also makes anterior matrices. And what you'll notice on that image on the right is they're color-coded. So every color is designed for the height with which you and I want our interproximal contact. So the system involves you and I measuring the distance from the papilla to where we want the contact, the distance from the papilla to the incisal edge. We choose the appropriate BioClear band, and we can restore both of those teeth at one time, 8 and 9, just like we restored back to back to back in the posterior segments. Either way works. I wanted to give you 2 different options to do it, but from a technique standpoint, a diastema closure and a class 4 are really identical. We just start from the lingual and we build to the buccal. Unless you're using this band, then you have to be injecting your composite because you can see this band is like covering the mesial surface on the facial as well as the lingual. So that's a lot of information. And I'm here to tell you that each one of those topics is easy a half a day, if not a full day, but we covered a ton of ground. If you want details on any of these things, thank you to Ivoclar VivaNet for bringing me here. Thank you to Viva Learning for inviting me. All you got to do is take your phone right now and scan that QR code. It'll take you to a landing page. There's a ton of CE for you there as a dentist. There's a ton of CE there for your team members. You can choose to register yourself, and it includes 2 team members. It's super, super easy. So grab your phone, take that, or if you want to just reach out to me and ask any questions at all, please, please, please feel free to reach out. That is my email, david.rice@ignitedds.com. And I post a ton of content on Instagram @IgniteDDS, little tips and tricks that are steps, minimal steps to things we talked about today. So I'm going to turn it over for a little Q&A. I'm going to pull up our questions here. We have a couple questions here in the tank. So if you have one, please feel free to answer. We've got a few minutes here. So first question is, Do I recommend etching? I recommend etching enamel. Yes. So there's a strong difference between the makeup of enamel. Enamel is like a boulder, right? It's like a rock versus dentin. Dentin we have to treat very, very delicately. So I do not recommend etching dentin today. I do recommend etching the enamel. Now, for those of you out there who are total etchers, if you had zero post-op sensitivity and that's your technique and you've been doing it for a while, great, keep doing it. It's just not necessary in today's world. If you're using the right adhesive, you don't need to do it. Let's see, what else? On the first buy, why didn't I extend the small occlusal finger into, oh, excellent. So basically is why didn't I extend my prep on the premolar that I showed? So remember, for me, I love minimal preparation to get beyond decay. I like minimal preparation to get beyond a fracture, to get beyond an existing restoration. And my only caveat to satisfy is I don't want to be so conservative that I can't instrument. So whenever I can slot prepare, I'm not worried about the adhesive process. The adhesive process really, really works. So we used to extend into pits and fissures with different materials because we were worried either that we needed more surface area to get a bond, or if we were using a restorative material like amalgam. You know, we had the whole extension for prevention in the past, but don't need to do that today. What was the name of the composite instrument? It was Optrasculpt. So OPTRASCULPT. Like I said, I'm guessing you all have an Ivoclar rep, or if you work with Patterson or Shine or Benko, and you can buy that instrument through everybody as far as I know. Howard Glazer, a dentist, developed that instrument, really cool, you know, saw a gap and an ability to help us all. It's a great, great instrument anteriorly and posteriorly. So next question, did I say tetric flow up to 4 millimeters and then packable on top? Awesome question. So you and I have the ability to place our flowable, our power flow up to 4 millimeters of depth, because power flow is Ivoclar Vivadent's bulk flowable composite. So that can go to 4 millimeters. Now, philosophically, that doesn't mean any of you or I need to go to 4 millimeters. So typically what I'll do is I'll kind of measure the depth of my prep. Let's say it's 6 millimeters. If that's the case, I most often go, 1 to 2 millimeters with my flow, and then I'll do 4 millimeters with my tetric power fill. So I'm always doing math so I can do 2 layers. So if it's 6 millimeters, I'll do 2 millimeters of flow, 4 millimeters of my actual bulk paste, my power fill. If it's 5 millimeters, 4 millimeters, 3 millimeters depth of prep, I'll switch gears. I don't like to put too much flowable in, especially in a maxillary tooth, because of gravity, right? It moves around. The beauty of it is it's self-leveling. But if I put 4 millimeters in on tooth number 2 or 15, it tends to run around. So I want to maximize my advantage and minimize my work. So let's see, next question. For core buildup, do I only etch the enamel rim and leave the dentin, or would you do it for 2 to 5 sets? Okay, great question. So on a core buildup, do I etch my dentin? I don't have to etch my dentin on a core buildup. Similar to, I don't need to etch my dentin on a direct composite. But what I do have to make sure is that my adhesive pairs with my core buildup, meaning my adhesive works with a dual cure core buildup material, which most core buildup materials are dual cure, right? They're dual cure for a reason, because we can add a bulk of material at one time. And our manufacturing friends didn't, they wanted to make sure that we didn't under cure it. So it's nice that we can cure it with a light. It's nice that it will finish polymerizing all on its own. So just make sure that the instructions for use for your adhesive work with a dual cure core buildup material. And when in doubt, I can just tell you guys that Adhes Universal does. So, feel free. Name for the anterior instrument, the flat pad, is the same. It's still an Optrosculpt. So Optrosculpt comes with pads for the anterior as well as attachments for the posteriors. It's a great little system. Let's see. Do I recommend a specific Profivis to not scratch Dell composite? That's a great question too. So I'm very careful with Profi paste, and not just for composites, but for all ceramic materials as well. You want to use a Profi paste that has the kindest, so minimal grit. And what you're going to find out there is more Profi paste than not have more grit than you would expect. So I like to be as conservative as I can be. Proxit's a really good one. There's other really good ones out there as well. So gang, that brings us right to 8. If you have questions, like I said, please feel free to reach out to my email, or if it's easier for you to go to Instagram and just direct message, whatever helps you most, I'm happy to help. Thank you all so much for your time tonight. I hope you have a great rest of your week and a great weekend ahead.